Hey everybody, Andy Lynn here with Align Mold Consulting. I wanted to jump on and make a quick video about diagnosing an environmental testing, an appropriate order of operations with being cognizant of resources. If you are navigating environmental illnesses, you know that healing from these illnesses requires a multifaceted approach that is oftentimes expensive. You have to diagnose an environment, heal an environment, diagnose your body, heal your body, and is oftentimes out of pocket. So it is paramount that you are cognizant of where you're putting your resources and really having a plan of action. As an advocate, the biggest mistake I see folks make is acquiring really a lot of data points without moving forward or obtaining a good solid diagnosis. And so that's what I want to talk about today. When I first talk with somebody and they say, gosh, I really want to test my home for mold. And, before I make any recommendations, I ask them really a lot of questions. And what I'm trying to do is obtain an objective. Mold testing is simply just a tool that should be employed alongside other tools during an investigation. It's really important to understand that any environmental test really needs to be employed with an objective in mind. Also, besides that, you have to really work with somebody that understands the limitations and strengths of each testing methodology. And it's frightening to see people make really big decisions just based off of one data point without understanding, how to interpret these data points that these tests render. So that's what I want to talk about. So, the first thing is obtaining an objective. So if you own your home and your final goal is to remediate any issue that is potentially there, any efforts to test or investigate your home should meet two objectives. Number one, identify sources of moisture, past and present, if possible. And two, determine what exactly what building material is affected by mold. That might seem obvious, but you'd be really surprised. So when you're just starting out and testing your home, you want to take a holistic view of the home. A home is a living and breathing entity with pathways and pressure differentials, air moves, and fungi can really proliferate. So it's advantageous to, take a very holistic view of the home, because if you have an unhealthy fungal ecology, say in the basement, there's the ability for those spores to move, just by pressure differentials alone. So it's advantageous to look at the entire home. When you're first starting out, you want to take a holistic and a direct approach. And by direct, I mean look for sources of moisture. Moisture is at the nucleus of all biological contaminants. So if you can identify the moisture issues within the building envelope, you're going to inadvertently find those biological contaminants. Finding a good mold inspector is not always simple, and I appreciate that, and I know that. But a good mold inspector is somebody that is a really well-rounded professional. So a good mold inspector should be somebody that's very knowledgeable on mold and mold testing methodologies. Mold is ubiquitous in nature, and different taxon and genera of molds tell different stories. And you want a professional that really knows the tools that they're using. They should, know the strengths and limitations of each and every testing methodology, because each and every testing methodology does indeed have its own limitations and strengths. And it's really important that your professional understand these things in order to interpret the data points that they render. A good mold inspector, and this is really important, you guys, should also be really knowledgeable in the building sciences. They should be really proficient in understanding changing building codes, being able to identify building defects. They should really know the anatomy and physiology of the home. They should know where to look for moisture and why it's there. Identifying that moisture issue isn't always simple. It's not always straightforward. And it's, so you want somebody that knows where to look for it. So, besides mold testing, these inspectors should be employing the use of other tools as well. Thermal imaging, moisture meters, a good flashlight, borescope camera if needed. And really a lot of good data can be rendered from a visual inspection. Now, let's talk about mold testing. And I know this is a contentious topic, and I hope I don't ruffle any feathers, but I am open to conversations, and I love to hear your opinions. So, Air sampling, spore traps get really, really, really a lot of gruff, and I get it. I've seen in my own home, I've seen the limitations of spore traps. So if you're not familiar, a spore trap is an air sample. The sample is pulled through a specialized pump that's going to pull in a very specific volume of air over a time period. Usually in the field, you'll see air samples from 5-10 minutes, whatever. A spore trap air sample is truly indeed a snapshot in time. Molds will not sporulate at the same time. And what the spore trap does is it will look at molds, viable and non-viable mold spores in the air. It is evaluated through microscopy in a lab and then identified down to the genus level. That's a good data point because what we're looking for are genera of mold that are indicative of water damage. So mold is classified by water activity needed to grow. So you have primary colonizers, secondary colonizers, and tertiary colonizers. So if you've heard the term black mold, which is a very colloquial term, it's literally referring to tertiary molds. These are molds that require really long-term water damage. So knowing the genera of the mold in the air it's a great data point. Now, if you're going to use air sampling and invest in that, it's really important that you understand the limitations. There are a ton of limitations with air sampling. It should never, ever, ever be used as a standalone diagnosis. So humidity will affect the air samples. So if you are taking an air sample in an environment with high humidity, you can expect to see clean air samples. Those spores aren't going to be sporulating or in the air. They will not always pick up Stachybotrys or Chytomium. Those are tertiary molds that have really heavy, sticky spores. They do. I mean, I see air samples with them all the time. But there's definitely limitations. Now, this is where it gets contentious because some people just absolutely hate air sampling and, it didn't pick up this issue and great, I get it. And I'm in that situation right now. So let me give you an analogy because I think air sampling is a very appropriate place to start when doing environmental testing. Say you go into the doctor and you don't feel good and the doctor says, okay, well, Andy, I'm going to order you an MRI. They typically won't do that, right? MRIs are expensive. They're not going to just jump you into exploratory surgery, right? Typically where your doctor will start is by pulling some blood samples. And sometimes your blood samples come back great. Sometimes they're indicative of, you've got a low white blood cell count. So, you start with blood sampling, right? And sometimes their doctor says, Andrea, your blood samples looked great. And gosh, doc, I just am really not feeling good. And then you move on to other things, right? They're going to give you a physical exam, check your blood. Then they might send you to a specialist. They might do a CT scan or an MRI or whatever it may be. So diagnosing an environment should kind of take the same approach. It's not always straightforward, and like I said, a home is a living and breathing entity. So you should start with a very holistic, inspection, focusing on mold and moisture, trying to identify those moisture issues and using air sampling as a tool in that. Now, when a client starts working with a company, I always tell them, find somebody that you trust that you can build a relationship with. I like to see my clients work with a company that they can grow with. For example, hey, you guys did a great inspection. And by the way, these inspections are typically non-invasive. And even with the best inspector, things can be missed. And you need to understand that. And so that's why it's really important to really always take inventory of how you feel inside and outside of an environment. Because it saved me. I had air sampling done, an inspection, and nothing showed up. And I said to my professional, I said, I really don't feel good in this room. And that's when we pulled out the big guns, right? Those secondary efforts, that MRI, and we did a very expensive but wonderful mycotoxin air test. And sure enough, the issue showed up. And now we're about to undergo some exploratory remediation. So there's a time and a place for each and every testing methodology. And it's not that, I've been accused of, well, you don't believe in this, testing methodology, or you don't believe in that. And it's not that I don't believe in them. I understand them. Some of you know my story, some of you don't, but my education's in the sciences. I was a biology and chemistry major. I had a special interest in microbiology. I love to read about environmental testing. I cannot be an inspector because I don't have that building science knowledge, and also I'm incredibly hypersensitive. But I really like to understand all the tools out there and the strengths and limitations of each in order to guide my clients. So, and it's hard to see people make really big decisions based on just a data point. And I think that people sometimes give science, too much weight, right? First of all, science can be persuaded by money and politics and special interests, right? And also, when you're looking at environmental testing, you really have to understand that there's strengths and limitations in so many areas, right? So, for example, sample collection. There can be a lot of strengths and limitations with each sample collection, whether you're looking at dust or air or swab or whatever. And then you have different sample analysis in the lab. Some samples are evaluated through microscopy, and lab technicians are people. They can make mistakes. Some samples are evaluated through quantitative PCR, some through, ELISA and mass spectrometry. And so really knowing that there's limitations with all of these steps, right? The sample collection, the sample analysis, exogenous factors. In other words, some of these tests can produce, false positive results because the sample is picking up on a molecule in the environment that's very similar to the molecule that you're testing. So, at the end of the day, this is what I want to drive home to you. If you're going to allocate any resources to any environmental test, understand the data points, understand, what it's telling you, but also, try really hard to have a really clear objective in mind. Because some of these tests get really expensive. So I like to understand the strengths and limitations of each test, and then I weigh that with the cost, right? And so air sampling, I know this is a contentious topic, but air sampling for me is an appropriate place to start. You start there, because sometimes it will, I've talked to so many professionals that are like, yeah, I went into the house, everything looked really good. We got the air samples back, and sure enough, we saw elevated levels of aspen, in this part of the house. So I went back and investigated more and found the source. So they do have their, air sampling does have its place, but yes, there are limitations, and please, please, please work with a professional that understands these things. So oftentimes people buy a house, they will do a pre-purchase inspection. They'll say, hey, I want to add on mold testing. And you'll have an inspector that doesn't understand mold testing, doesn't understand the strengths, limitations, or the organism itself, and will run, just an air sample and be like, well, everything's good. Doesn't rule mold out. It's used as a diagnostic tool. It should be used, again, as an investigative tool. Environmental testing is really changing. I feel really excited to be a part of some pretty big, we are pioneering mycotoxin environmental testing. With this current issue in my home, I've had the advantage of working with two really great labs that do mycotoxin testing. One was an air test using ELISA. The other one was a swab using mass spectrometry. The problem is they're very expensive, really, really expensive. Like this one mycotoxin air test that identified the issue in my bedroom, it was $600 for one sample. Luckily, I did not pay for that. My very generous employer at the time, gifted it to me, as did the lab, but it identified the issue. So I hope to see environmental mycotoxin testing more commonly used. I hope that it gets to be more affordable, because people can't be, using this tool if it's not, eventually more affordable. Because my hope is if we can show that these things are truly indeed in the environment, then maybe Western medicine and allopathic doctors will take it more seriously. If you suffer from mycotoxin illness, you know that it's a very, very misunderstood disease, which is terribly frustrating because I'm telling you, the science is there. They literally have in the scientific studies, and if you read the literature like I have, they lay it out for you, like this is the biomechanisms on how these things affect us, and it's there. So, watch where you're putting your resources. Mold illness is not a one and done thing. We are gearing up for our 5th remediation in our home. And the reason we think that the issue is exterior. So part of our exploratory remediation efforts are going to be residing the house. We don't have the money. We're taking out a second mortgage. And so my point is these aren't illnesses that you just go hard and then it's in your rearview mirror. These can be lifelong, things. And so if you put all your eggs in one basket, and I've seen it. I've seen people spend $15,000 testing a 2,000 square foot home without obtaining an objective. You just want to be really careful because there's really, really a lot of baskets to put your eggs in while you're, evaluating these things. So that's what we do at Align Mold Consulting is I help people make decisions, right? Where to put their resources appropriately. And that's my biggest drive, is to save you money, to help get you through the process, to, walk that path with you, because I've made all the mistakes, but also, try to save you some money and, help you take those appropriate steps forward, again, with, appropriate allocation of your resources in mind. So that's what I've got for you today. In the comments below, I'd love to hear your views and what environmental tests that you like. And I'm open to discuss. So have a great day.